They created a future where time runs out at 30, where beauty, order, and control mask a far more unsettling truth. But what the audience didn't see was what the cast of Logan's Run was quietly living through behind the scenes. From reluctant stars to emotionally difficult scenes and eerie parallels between fiction and reality, the people who brought this cult classic to life carried stories they rarely told. Some were awkward, some bittersweet, and a few deeply personal. These are the cast secrets that add unexpected depth to a world built on illusion. York almost said no. It wasn't the script or the character that gave him pause. It was something more personal. When the role of Logan was first offered, the actor who would eventually define the character hesitated. The reason? He was already past the age of the very people the story was targeting for elimination. Michael York, known for his roles in Cabaret and The Three Musketeers, was 33 when he was approached to play Logan 5. In a world where 30 meant the end, York knew audiences might see the irony before the first scene was even over. Hollywood had long been known for casting adults as teenagers, but this felt like something different. It wasn't just about looking young, it was about symbolizing youth itself. What changed his mind wasn't a seasoned producer or a passionate director. It was his driver. During a routine car ride, a young man assigned to shuttle York around gave him an impromptu speech that left a mark. The driver, a passionate theater student, insisted he take the part. He believed the role had weight, that the story mattered, and that York was the right person for it. His passion was so persistent that it reportedly went on for the entire ride, possibly even to the point of following York into conversation breaks and rest stops. Eventually, York relented, more out of weariness than agreement, but something about the young man's insistence lingered. Taking the role meant stepping into a world that demanded suspension of disbelief, both from the audience and from himself. It meant running, emotionally and physically, in a character's shoes that were supposed to be a decade younger. What followed was one of the most memorable performances in the 1970s science fiction, and it all hinged on a decision made in the back seat of a car, influenced by someone who never appeared on screen. Sometimes it's the voices we least expect that steer us toward legacy. She hated the costume. It was supposed to symbolize purity and the minimalism of the future, but for one actress, it felt more like a constant reminder of vulnerability. What the audience saw as sleek and iconic, she experienced as revealing and deeply uncomfortable. Jenny Agutter, who played Jessica 6, was just 23 when she took on the role. The costume she wore throughout most of Logan's Run, a short, sheer, light-toned tunic, quickly became one of the film's visual signatures. To fans, it was futuristic and elegant. But for Agutter, wearing it during long shoot days, sometimes in public filming locations, was a challenge that went far beyond physical discomfort. In later interviews, she admitted to disliking the outfit intensely. It wasn't just the lack of coverage, it was the constant awareness of being looked at. The transparency of the material and the way it moved under the lights left her feeling exposed, both literally and emotionally. She recalled how difficult it was to concentrate on character work when she felt more like a design element than a person. Yet, she pushed through, maintaining composure while portraying one of the most nuanced roles in the film. Jessica wasn't just Logan's companion, she was a voice of doubt, rebellion, and empathy in a society that prized conformity. That emotional weight, combined with the visual presentation, created a strange duality. A character written with depth, but dressed like a mannequin in a showroom. The outfit went on to become a science fiction convention favorite, with countless recreations and homages across pop culture. Teenagers of the era remembered it vividly, often for reasons beyond storytelling. But for Agutter, it became a symbol of the way female characters were sometimes asked to carry more than their fair share, both on-screen and off. What the camera celebrated, the actress endured, and even decades later, that sense of imbalance lingers in her reflections. Sometimes the most futuristic elements in a film reveal just how dated our expectations really were. The Love Shop shock. Walking into the scene, she thought she knew what to expect. But once the camera started rolling, the environment shifted into something far more chaotic and intense than anyone had explained beforehand. Among the most talked about sequences in Logan's Run is the infamous Love Shop scene, a swirling choreographed depiction of sensual abandon meant to showcase the society's obsession with pleasure and control. But Behind the camera, it was far less glamorous. Jenny Agutter later revealed she had not been fully briefed on what the scene would entail until she was already on set. What was pitched as a stylized dance of intimacy turned into something far more charged and far more uncomfortable. The set was hot, dimly lit, and filled with bodies in constant motion. Extras were instructed to engage in suggestive movements, sometimes pressing in closer than anyone had rehearsed. The sequence's lighting and visual effects were meant to blur the line between fantasy and reality, but it left some of the cast feeling disoriented and overwhelmed. Agutter, caught in the center of it all, had to maintain composure despite feeling unsure of her surroundings and her role within them. To make matters more complex, the scene was edited several times to meet content guidelines. In some versions of the film, parts of the sequence are noticeably shortened or fragmented. This only added to the confusion around what the scene was really meant to communicate. Was it about passion or control, liberation or disconnection? Despite its visual extravagance, the scene left many, including Agutter, questioning its purpose. She later described the experience as one of the most difficult moments of the production, not because of physical demands, but because it required an emotional detachment that didn't come naturally. The final cut became one of the most iconic images of the film, but beneath the surface-level spectacle was a cast navigating boundaries that were often unclear, with emotions that weren't always easy to manage. What audiences remember as a bold vision of the future, some on set still recall as one of the most bewildering days of their careers. Wirework wounds. Floating mid-air under dazzling lights might have looked magical on screen, but behind the scenes, it was a different story entirely. The now famous carousel sequence, where participants are lifted into the air to meet their mysterious fate, was one of the most physically demanding parts of the production. And for the cast, the experience left more than just memories. It left bruises. The technical team used a complex wire rigging system to simulate levitation during the scene. Actors and stunt performers were strapped into harnesses and lifted by overhead pulley systems, spinning and dangling while fog machines and lasers fired below. The effect was mesmerizing to audiences. But for those performing it, the process was uncomfortable, exhausting, and sometimes downright painful. Michael York later recounted how grueling the entire shoot was, particularly the carousel. He and others were suspended in the air for hours at a time, often with limited padding and very little rest between takes. The harnesses dug into their bodies, circulation was cut off, and physical strain was inevitable. York didn't complain publicly at the time. Professionalism was expected. But years later, he acknowledged that it was one of the most physically taxing sequences he had ever filmed. The discomfort wasn't limited to just the rigging. The entire carousel set was visually dazzling but disorienting to perform in. Rotating lighting rigs, mirrored floors, and loud ambient soundtracks created a surreal and sometimes claustrophobic environment. Many actors reported that the bright beams and swirling fog made it difficult to tell where they were or how high they were being lifted. Despite the physical toll, the scene was considered essential. It symbolized the entire dystopian cycle of the film, dazzling spectacle masking a darker truth. And ironically, the pain the actors felt while suspended only mirrored the emotional tension their characters were supposed to convey: fear, uncertainty, and surrender to a system they couldn't control. Even with all the effort, viewers with a sharp eye can still spot the wires during the carousel sequence, a reminder that behind every illusion is a lot of very real strain. In the end, the pain was real, but so was the impact. The scene became one of the most unforgettable in 1970s sci-fi, floating forever in the minds of those who watched it, and those who lived through it. Faucet nearly missed it. Sometimes the path to stardom is paved with coincidence, and a tennis court. One of the most recognizable faces of the 1970s almost didn't make it into Logan's run at all. Her journey into the film didn't start in a casting office, but during a casual moment off set that would change everything. At the time, Farah Faucet was a rising model and commercial actress. She wasn't yet a household name, but one afternoon, while Michael York was on break from filming, he noticed her playing tennis nearby. He was struck by her presence, her smile, her energy, and that natural charisma that seemed to light up even the sidelines. It was York who recommended her for a role in the film, believing she had something special that would translate perfectly on screen. the producers listened, and in a matter of weeks, Faucet was cast as Holly, a character who works inside the film's plastic surgery facility. Though her screen time was brief, her appearance was unforgettable. Flowing red hair, wide eyes, and an uneasy expression as she explained the cosmetic transformation process to the protagonists. Her performance hinted at deeper layers of vulnerability and unease, and it stuck with audiences long after the scene ended. Ironically, while Logan's Run marked her entry into sci-fi cinema, it was Charlie's Angels that turned her into a cultural phenomenon shortly after. By the time the film hit wide release, Faucet had already become a sensation. Her posters were on bedroom walls across America, and her signature hairstyle was being copied in salons nationwide. Logan's Run became a curious footnote in her ascent, a quiet early chapter in what would become a whirlwind of fame. Looking back, it's easy to see the timing as a kind of perfect storm. If Michael York hadn't seen her that day, or if the producers had gone with someone else, Logan's Run might have lacked one of its most visually memorable characters. Faucet's role may have been small, but her impact, both in the film and far beyond it, was anything but. Sometimes all it takes is the right person noticing at the right moment. And in this case, a spontaneous recommendation added a rising star to a futuristic world. The scene that got cut. What was meant to be one of the film's most emotionally charged moments never made it to theaters. Buried in the editing process was a scene that one cast member considered his most powerful contribution, and its removal left a noticeable gap, at least for those who were there to witness it. During early versions of Logan's Run, a dramatic sequence was filmed featuring Francis, Logan's former ally turned relentless pursuer, chasing down a terrified runner through a public square. The chase wasn't just action, it was personal. Richard Jordan, who portrayed Francis, had built his character around a kind of moral rigidity. For him, this moment of pursuit was meant to be a climax of emotional confusion and authority in conflict. Jordan reportedly poured himself into the scene. He worked with stunt coordinators to fine-tune every movement, ensuring that the sequence would reflect both physical tension and psychological weight. The extras were instructed to react as if this were an honored ritual, a moment of public duty, while Jordan's character grew more conflicted with every step. But during test screenings, the studio received feedback that the film was too long and that audiences didn't fully grasp the deeper psychological undertones. In response, the decision was made to cut the scene. The studio needed tighter pacing and more direct action. What was left on the cutting room floor was a nuanced performance that many on the crew considered one of Jordan's most affecting moments. The actor didn't speak publicly about the cut, but those who worked on the set recalled his disappointment. For a performer who had taken his role seriously, even staying in character between takes, the removal of such a key scene felt like losing a piece of the character's soul. His arc, already complex, lost a moment of emotional clarity. Today, the sequence exists only in production notes and the memories of those who saw it filmed. No extended cut has ever been released to restore it. And like many things in Hollywood, it remains a what if, a quiet secret known only to the few who saw it come to life before it vanished in post-production. Too old to run. Audiences accepted the premise without question. In this gleaming future, life ends at 30. What most didn't realize is that nearly every actor in the film had already passed that expiration date. Behind the sleek costumes and youthful energy, the core cast of Logan's Run was pushing well past the Dome Society's fatal age limit. Michael York, who played Logan 5, was 33. Richard Jordan, cast as Francis 7, was 38. Only Jenny Agutter and Farah Faucet were actually under 30 at the time of filming. It was a quietly ironic twist. Actors portraying people trying to avoid a milestone they had already surpassed in real life. This wasn't a production oversight. In fact, the casting directly influenced the story's development. The original novel by William F. Nolan had set the society's death age at 21, not 30. But when the screenplay was adapted for the screen, adjustments were made. Part of that shift came down to casting practicality. Finding credible leads in their early 20s who could carry the emotional and narrative weight of a feature film proved difficult. So the cutoff age was raised. For York, the irony wasn't lost. He later joked about being technically doomed before even stepping onto set. Yet, his portrayal of Logan carried a conviction that transcended age. His expressions of fear, doubt, and eventual defiance made the character feel authentically youthful, even if the actor had already passed the dome's invisible line. The same went for Richard Jordan, whose age gave Francis a subtle gravitas that might not have been possible with a younger performer. His performance carried layers of inner conflict, loyalty, and desperation, traits that often deepen with life experience. Still, the contrast remained. In a world where 30 meant the end, the cast members were all survivors of their own fiction. And while audiences accepted the illusion, those involved in production couldn't ignore the unintentional commentary. Even in a film about youth worship and enforced expiration, age had a way of sneaking back in. It's a reminder that fiction often reveals more than it intends. While Logan's Run warned about the dangers of an age-obsessed society, it quietly proved that experience, something you can't fake, was still essential to bring that warning to life. Tension behind the sparkle. On screen, their connection felt natural. Two rebels navigating a world built on illusion. But behind the scenes, the bond between the lead characters was far more restrained, even distant. In Logan's Run, Logan and Jessica's relationship drives much of the emotional narrative. Their journey from cautious allies to something more intimate gave the film a rare emotional core beneath its visual spectacle. Audiences believed in their chemistry. But off-camera, Michael York and Jenny Agutter shared a professional relationship that never quite developed into a personal one. There was no feud or argument, just two people with very different energies and working styles. York, trained in classical theater, was precise and methodical. Agutter, younger and more instinctive, approached scenes with a different rhythm. Their performances came together beautifully on film. But the process of getting there wasn't as seamless as it appeared. Crew members later recalled a quiet reserve between the two actors. They weren't cold, but neither were they particularly close. They would rehearse, perform, and return to their individual routines. In an industry known for intense on-set bonds and off-screen romances, their distance was unusual, and yet, that very dynamic may have contributed to the strength of their performances. Jessica begins the film wary of Logan, questioning his motives and struggling to trust him. The tension in those early scenes feels real, and perhaps it was. Over time, as the characters grow closer, so too did the actors develop a working respect for one another. But the emotional closeness never fully materialized. Agutter would later describe York as charming and talented, but admitted they didn't spend much time together beyond their shared scenes. York, for his part, rarely commented on their working relationship in interviews, choosing instead to speak broadly about the cast and the production. Sometimes the best screen partnerships aren't built on friendship, but friction. And in the world of Logan's Run, where trust is always earned and never assumed, the subtle tension between its two stars only added another layer of authenticity to their performances. The mask scene mystery. Some moments on set leave a mark that lingers long after the camera stops rolling. For one actress, a surreal sequence involving a melting face and surgical machinery became one of the most unsettling scenes she would ever film. In Logan's Run, the scene inside the new cosmetic clinic delivers more than just a showcase of futuristic surgery. It drifts into something symbolic, even nightmarish. The moment when the robotic laser misfires and the surgeon's mask begins to melt still unnerves viewers today. But the actress at the center of it all, Jenny Agutter, experienced the scene with a deeper discomfort that wasn't just about special effects. She later recalled that the director, Michael Anderson, didn't want her to play the moment like a standard reaction. Instead, he gave her a cryptic directive: "Don't act, just feel the loss of identity." The line struck her. What was supposed to be a sci-fi thriller had suddenly transformed into something emotionally intimate and philosophically loaded. The scene forced Agutter to confront the unsettling theme at the core of the movie: a society where image, perfection, and sameness are prized above individuality. Watching a surgeon's face disintegrate, even through prosthetics and visual trickery, made the metaphor feel painfully real. Who are we when our faces no longer belong to us? When even identity becomes a manufactured product? While filming, she had to hold her expression, not in fear, but in something closer to quiet horror. It wasn't the situation that scared her, but what it represented. The scene was shot with deliberate stillness, giving the camera room to capture every flicker of her reaction. Behind the scenes, the effect took time to set up, and the room was uncomfortably warm under the lights. But none of that was as heavy as the emotional weight of the moment. To this day, Agutter considers it one of the most haunting scenes she's been part of, not because of the visuals, but because it touched a psychological nerve. The film asked her not to pretend, but to experience. And what she experienced was the fear of vanishing in plain sight, something that resonates far beyond the screen. Deain walked away. Every now and then, a single casting change reshapes an entire film. In the case of Logan's Run, one actor's departure cleared the path for another performer who would become the emotional backbone of the story. Originally, the role of Francis was offered to William Deain, an actor with an intense screen presence and a growing list of critically respected roles. Deain had already made a name for himself in serious dramatic work, and the producers believed his edge would bring depth to Logan's determined former friend. For a time, he was fully committed to the role. Costumes were being prepared, and shooting schedules were arranged around his availability. Then came the opportunity to work with a legend, Alfred Hitchcock. Deain was offered a role in Family Plot, the famed director's final film. Torn between a futuristic thriller and a chance to collaborate with a cinematic icon, Deain made his decision. He walked away from Logan's Run without regret, believing the Hitchcock opportunity was too rare to pass up. His exit threw the production into a minor panic. The character of Francis was too pivotal to delay long. But, as luck would have it, Richard Jordan stepped in, almost seamlessly. Unlike Deain, Jordan hadn't yet achieved broad recognition. What he brought, however, was an intensity that made Francis feel dangerously real. His moral conflict and quiet desperation gave the character emotional complexity that surprised even the writers. Jordan didn't just replace a name, he redefined the character. Rather than playing Francis as a cold enforcer, he found layers of loyalty, fear, and personal betrayal that elevated every scene. His interactions with Logan, especially during their final confrontation, brought a gravitas that lingered long after the credits rolled. Years later, when asked about Logan's Run, Deain admitted that he had never seen the film. Perhaps he didn't want to look back, or maybe, in a town full of what-ifs, he simply moved on without wondering what might have been. Whatever the reason, his absence gave rise to one of the film's most emotionally grounded performances, a role that might never have existed in quite the same way if Deain had stayed. Jordan took it too far. Every cast has that one performer who dives deeper than expected, so far, in fact, that it begins to blur the line between performance and reality. On the set of Logan's Run, that actor was Richard Jordan. Portraying Francis, a devoted Sandman hunting down his former friend, Jordan approached the role with unflinching seriousness. But it wasn't just in front of the camera. Crew members began to notice something different about him. He rarely smiled, often stood alone between takes, and maintained an air of stoic command that echoed the cold certainty of his character. People began referring to him as intense. He avoided small talk, skipped most social interactions, and reportedly even distanced himself from Michael York off camera. Some initially thought he was just reserved, but as filming continued, it became clear Jordan was staying in character even when no one was rolling. His immersion created an atmosphere of quiet tension. While other actors would relax and chat during breaks, Jordan would remain fixed, reviewing his script or standing silently, observing the crew and cast like a Sandman observing runners. He never announced his method. He simply lived it. For him, embodying Francis meant absorbing the mindset of someone who had never questioned the system, who genuinely believed in the sanctity of order and control. It wasn't about intimidation or ego, it was psychological immersion. Jordan believed that emotional truth couldn't be turned on and off with a director's cue. And while this intensity wasn't easy for everyone to be around, it worked. His performance carried a quiet menace that was never overplayed, just eerily authentic. Once the final scene was shot and production wrapped, the transformation was almost instant. Jordan, now free from Francis, returned to his usual self. The serious mask lifted, and the cast finally saw the warmth and humor that had been locked away for the duration of filming. To some, it was jarring, like watching a stranger become someone they never knew was there all along. Jordan's deep dive method may have been difficult, but it paid off. His portrayal of Francis didn't just support the film, It sharpened its edge, and for a story that revolved around loyalty, betrayal, and belief in the system, having an actor who believed every word, even off camera, gave the film a chilling layer of truth. The movie that haunted her. Some roles leave a mark that lingers far beyond the final take, not because of fame, but because of what they reveal. For Jenny Agutter, Logan's Run wasn't just a career milestone, it became a film that quietly haunted her. Agutter played Jessica, the woman who questions everything in a world where questioning is forbidden. At the time, she was still early in her career, and the film offered her a lead role in a big-budget American production. But the experience stayed with her, not for its success, but for the themes it forced her to confront. In later interviews, Agutter shared how Logan's Run reflected a disturbing societal obsession with youth. The idea that people were discarded at 30 wasn't just science fiction. It echoed pressures she and other women in the industry already felt. Roles for actresses often dried up with age. Image mattered more than substance. Watching Jessica navigate a world that valued perfection over humanity didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a heightened mirror of the very world she was working in. Agutter spoke about how Jessica's journey, her fear, her courage, her refusal to accept the rules, mirrored thoughts she hadn't fully expressed at the time. It wasn't just acting, it was something personal, and that sense of truth beneath the fiction is what stayed with her. She also noted how fans would often approach her not with excitement about the action scenes or the effects, but to discuss the deeper implications. Conversations about aging, identity, and conformity became regular parts of her interaction with audiences. The film had tapped into something real, and many saw Jessica as more than just a sci-fi queen. They saw her as a symbol of resistance in a world obsessed with appearances. Even decades later, Agutter has continued to reflect on the role with thoughtfulness. She doesn't view Logan's Run as a campy relic of the past, but as a piece of art that asked uncomfortable questions. Questions she was still asking herself as she grew older in an industry that hadn't changed as much as it liked to pretend. For her, it was never just fiction. It was a warning wrapped in futurism. And that's why Logan's Run never really let go. For a film set in a distant future, Logan's Run revealed a lot about the present. Ambition, vanity, control, and the quiet resistance of the human spirit. The secrets behind its making aren't just trivia. They show how deeply the cast invested themselves in a world that mirrored their own realities. Whether it was Jenny Agutter confronting the pressures of youth, Richard Jordan dissolving into his character, or missed casting choices that shifted the story's course, these revelations only deepen the legacy of a sci-fi classic that refuses to fade. If you enjoyed exploring the hidden side of Logan's Run, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more cinematic deep dives. What was the most surprising secret you learned about the cast? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what stood out to you.